as long as you blur my face.
Yeah, we'll edit it for content and blurring faces and stuff. All right, so we've got that list there. That's kind of our communication list. It's really almost every time I put a list of what makes for a good leader, it always ends up being heavy on communication, always, because that's how we interact with each other. That's how we know each other, through communication. So if we know somebody's a good leader, it's through communicating that we do that. So let's just define communication for a second. It's really simple. This is kind of elementary stuff, but we've got really 4 things that we do when we communicate, 2 ways of doing it. There's silence and sound, internal, external, and then there's disseminating information and collecting information. That's really all we're doing when we're communicating, is either giving out some information or pulling it in. And I think when we simplify a definition of something that has a lot of facets, it helps us kind of focus in. So let's think about whenever we're communicating about whether we're disseminating information or collecting information. There's 4 ways we do it. The first one is we listen. The second one is we speak. We also can read. 10 points for whoever can guess the last one.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So for collecting or disseminating information, we're either speaking or writing for disseminating, or I guess you could say that we disseminate information in other ways too, but let's call it speaking or writing. If we're using body language, we'll count that as part of speaking. Or when we're collecting, we're either listening or reading. And these all kind of work within each other, kind of like this. So somebody can speak something, and you can listen to it. If you listen to it, you can write it down. If you write it down, you can read it. And if you read it, you can speak it. They all kind of work together, and we're doing them all the time. I'm talking a little while about how much we're doing of each, but we're doing all of it quite often. All right, this is just a little analogy to help us kind of figure out what it means to get people on the same page. These are vectors. You guys remember how vectors work? I'm talking to engineers here. That's always intimidating. All right, I'm going to talk about a math concept in front of engineers. Bad idea. Yeah, so tell me about vectors. What do they do? There's 2 things. What are the 2 things?
Magnitude and a direction.
Yeah, we get a direction, and then the length will tell us the magnitude, right? So this one has less magnitude than that one. And the great thing about vectors is you can combine them like this. There's a new vector right there. That's their combined vector. You can also combine them if they're going different directions, like this. So we're going to use an analogy where we're all vectors. We're the leader vector, and our job is to maximize the magnitude of our team. Here's our team. This is us. This is us setting direction right here. And our team is doing what they're doing. If we were to take this team, just how it is right now, and kind of combine it together, do that by, there we go. That's our team's direction and magnitude. Not bad, right? We set our direction like that. The team's headed sort of in the same direction. It's a pretty long line. Good magnitude. Well, let's imagine that if we were to somehow get all of our vectors heading the same direction, what kind of magnitude we might have. There's the same team. This time they're headed in the same direction. What do you predict here? Oh wait, we're out of room already, so let's scale it back. All right, that's our team. There is our magnitude. Let's compare that to the other team. So I know that this isn't a perfect analogy, but it kind of does point out what it means to get people on the same page if we're looking to maximize magnitude, right? What could that mean for you?
Increased productivity.
Yeah, it could. The magnitude could be productivity. The magnitude could be a PR campaign. It could be any number of things. But it seems to me if we get people heading the same direction, then our chances of making an impact are much greater. So the idea is we have to be able to communicate well in order to get people heading the same direction. Now there's nothing wrong with somebody on our team saying, oh, I don't feel like we're heading the right direction. That's a different thing. That's a communication thing, right? And that's just fine. But people are not understanding exactly where we're going, and we're heading all over the place, and our magnitude gets diminished. Let's imagine that we have a team like this. What happens here? These two are ignoring each other. These two hate each other. Hate, ignore, ignore, hate, hate.
I'm gonna give you a lot done.
Yeah, what's our magnitude?
Oh, 0.
It's, the team's magnitude is 0 in this scenario, right? Okay, what about this one? I love this little brown noser right here. It's like, come on guys, the boss said we gotta go. What's our overall magnitude right here?
Negative.
It's negative, right. They're headed exactly the opposite direction of where we're trying to set the direction. Have we ever seen teams like this?
Oh, yeah.
Have we seen teams like this? Oops, like this, where the infighting just takes it all away. So how do we deal with that as leaders? How do we get our team to look like this?
I think the one thing that comes to my mind is, we've in this scenario, you've set the direction. Whether so what is the direction? I think setting a clear, concise goal of where you want to be, and then stepping back and saying, okay, what do we need to do to get to here?
Yeah.
And then getting everybody on board with that.
Yeah, in the world of instructional technology, instructional design where I live, it's called backward design, where you define really well what the end looks like. That's where you start. You start with that, and then you talk about where you actually are, and then you deal with the gap.
Mm-hmm.
You define that part first. Yeah, I like that. That's good. So, trying to define what things are for people is a really difficult thing. Communication is actually much harder than we think. And a part of it has to do with mindsets. And here's an example. We've got this little cylinder floating in a room. We've got 2 lamps going 2 different directions at it. The people standing right here looking at this, what are they saying? It's a circle. People standing here looking at this are saying it's a square. This is politics, by the way. This is exactly what politics are. If you were to be able to step back and see the actual truth, you'd see it's a cylinder being projected. But yeah, that's true. That's right. It is a square. That's true. Yeah, it's a circle. And those 2 groups talking to each other about the same thing? Nope. They don't see eye to eye, do they? So, as a leader, our job is to understand that there are 2 perspectives here and make sure that we've communicated the right perspective to the people that we need to communicate to. Okay, so I need somebody to read this for me. This actually, it's going to say something about Cambridge University. It's not from Cambridge University. This is just a meme that's gone all over the internet. Who can read it for me? Go ahead, please.
I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading. The phenomenal power of the human mind, according to research at Cambridge University. Doesn't matter in what order the letters are in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole.
No, it's because spell check has created an idiot in me. That's the way I hide. And somebody switches it around and fixes it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's magically fixed for you, right? Yeah, so actually, what are some takeaways, though? You were able to read through that paragraph with no problem, right? And most words are misspelled horribly, but because of context, you were able to do it. What are some takeaways if we realize that context is being used in the messages that we send out?
Context matters.
Context absolutely matters. You were able to, within a couple of words, set a context that allowed you to read the entire paragraph, weren't you? Is that context laid out here on the page at all? Not really. No. We all used the same context almost immediately, though, didn't we? We were able to follow along with that. So the fact is, what if this writer was actually intending for you to try to sound out the words the way they're actually spelled? Well, then we missed it, right? If that's what the intention was. But maybe the intention was to just, hey, I can misspell every word, and now we don't have to worry about spelling anymore. It's a new world, right? But the fact is, that's not what was actually written on there. So, a couple things we can take away from this. One is that this word is dependent on context, and we set that context by analyzing pictures. All we're doing is writing down hieroglyphs. We're drawing hieroglyphs for people. They're pretty specific and well thought out hieroglyphs, but that's really what we're doing. And so anytime somebody looks at this hieroglyph, they might understand this hieroglyph to mean something slightly different than what you understand it to mean. The word word? Okay, maybe not, but you understand what I'm saying. So our contexts are important, and as communicators, we have to set the right context. We have to somehow convey the context. This person was able to convey the context because everybody just jumped in and saw that it was a challenge and did it, right? Okay, so I'm going to set context for you for a minute. Stare right at this white dot right there that we're going to spend 30 seconds setting context. Another light switch.
You gotta walk down the hall.
It's down the hall?
Yeah.
So that half of the room is here. Okay, stare at that. Well, it'll work without turning off the light. "30 seconds.
Normally this is when one of those scary faces jumps out.
Yeah, yesterday was Halloween. Okay, the context has been set. Keep your eyes on that dot. Now I'd like you to look at a white, blank slide here.
What?
You can kind of see some colors there probably, right?
Yeah.
You're bringing your context with you into the white slide I want you. It's probably starting to fade now, but to the white slide that I want you to look at, you brought context with you. Your brain did it for you. You didn't specifically say, I'm going to hang on to the opposite colors of what I'm staring at. Your brain did that for you. And you did it subconsciously. Let me show you something even more crazy. On this next slide, there'll be a black plus sign right about here. I want you to stare right at that black plus sign. There's some pink dots, and a green dot that's going to go around in a circle. Okay, stare right at the black plus sign. For too long, that green dot, those pink dots will just start to kind of fade away. They'll just start to just disappear. Starting to disappear for anyone? Starting to fade. For too long, you won't be able to see them at all. Even though I assure you they're there. Now, even crazier, if I were to tell you that green dot's not actually there, would you believe me? Follow the green dot with your eyes. It's not actually there. There's no green dot. It's the opposite color of that pink. Your brain, when the pink goes away, your brain tries to adjust and it doesn't. So your brain's bringing context. It's bringing context to this that you would, if you were staring at this, you would swear there's a green dot going around, wouldn't you? You might believe that, yeah, those pink dots are actually there because you saw them at first and they started to fade. But there was no green dot. So the context, if I were to send a message about this thing, that I would have to set some context explaining why there's a green dot when there really isn't one, wouldn't I? Now, how do we apply this to our daily communication? What does this help us understand? Let me turn that light back on.
You need to make sure you're telling the whole story.
Yeah.
I mean, if you leave things out, that the whole message isn't going to be passed on, and there's going to have to be some interpretation brought in by whoever, and that's where your mistakes and errors can play in. I think.
How many of us have sent out an email that was just completely misinterpreted? Anybody? It happens. Text messages especially, right?
No.
Yeah, probably. Huh. Yeah, text messages and emails are interesting because, you know, when we're talking face to face, we can get to context a little easier because we hear voice inflections and we see facial cues and body movements, and that all, we read it all. We're reading it all and listening to it all. But when we take this informal conversation and we put it into words and then tweet it out, suddenly all of that extra stuff goes away and it can be misinterpreted. That's why they invented emojis, honestly. They invented emojis to put some of that stuff back into it. So it's quite important that we understand that context is not necessarily set by us as the communicator. Context is set by who?
The person receiving,
Right,
the audience.
the audience. So, step number one for communicating well is understanding and knowing your audience's context. So if you're working with a crew, you need to know their context. What do they know? Do they understand your acronyms? Do they understand your terms? What's their reading proficiency level? That might be a question to ask. How in-depth do we need to get? All those questions should be asked, and that's the first thing you do. You decide who your audience is, and you figure out how much they know, how much context they already have in what you're talking about. And then when you send out your message, you can gear it towards that context. Somebody you've worked with for years, maybe working on the same types of projects. You don't have to set out a ton of context for them. But we should spend some time before we send any message thinking about who's our audience and how do we best communicate this particular message. All right, we're going to take just a few minutes to watch a clip. It's about, I think about 15 minutes in fact. Oh hey, what's going on? Okay, so I can't do it. We'll come back to that. Remind me to come back to the clip about Jack, okay? Let's talk for a minute about what it takes to be an extraordinary leader. So we already put on the board over here this list of what we kind of decided makes a good leader. And let me pause that.